A Japanese fighter plane came down in a ploughed field on Niihau a little after 1 in the afternoon on December 7th, 1941, and the first man to reach it climbed onto the wing and pulled the pilot's pistol out of his hands before he had come around. The Hawaiian who did this, Hawila Kaleohano, did not know Pearl Harbor had been attacked that morning. He took the gun because he did not like the look of it. Niihau sits 17 miles off the coast of Kauai, the kind of place that does not appear on most maps with any detail. The Robinsons, a white ranching family, had owned it outright since 1864 and worked it for cattle and sheep. Almost nobody set foot there without their say-so. The 136 people who lived on it spoke Hawaiian, raised stock, and got their news whenever somebody rode it over. There was no electricity. There were no telephones. On the afternoon the Zero came down, the war was about 5 hours old, and no one out there had heard a word of it. Kaleohano could not read Japanese, but he had read enough newspapers to know Tokyo and Washington were not on speaking terms, and that the plane with the red discs on its wings belonged to the wrong side of that argument. He dragged the pilot out of the cockpit, took a folded set of documents off him, and pocketed those along with the gun. The pilot, a 22-year-old airman named Shigenori Nishikaichi, put up no fight. He was dazed, his aircraft was wrecked, and 3 Hawaiians had him outnumbered on a strip of land the Navy promised would be empty. The empty island was not his mistake. The Imperial Navy had picked Niihau off a chart as a spot for crippled aircraft to put down after the raid, on the theory that nobody lived there, with a submarine waiting offshore to collect whoever made it that far. The chart was wrong by 136 people, so instead of an empty beach and a quiet wait for the submarine, the pilot got Hawaiian hospitality. The islanders fed him. That afternoon they threw him a party, the way the place would for any stranger who turned up out of nowhere, and at some point he picked up a borrowed guitar and sang a song in his own language, while a room full of people who could not understand a word of it listened. Talking to him was the trouble. The flyer had a few words of English, and the Hawaiians had none of his, so they sent for one of the 3 residents of Japanese descent on the island. The first was Ishimatsu Shintani, an immigrant who kept bees and had married a Hawaiian woman, a man who had lived among them for years. He came when they asked. He traded a handful of low sentences with the prisoner, said nothing about what had passed between them, and went home. Whatever he had heard put a look on his face the others did not like, and he wanted no further part of it. That left the Haradas. Yoshio Harada had been born in Hawaii to Japanese parents, and his wife, Irene, had come from Kauai. When the 2 of them sat down with the prisoner, Nishikaichi gave them the news the island did not yet have. Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor that morning. The countries were at war, and the documents in Kaleohano's pocket could not fall into American hands. Yoshio listened and said nothing to anyone. A few hours on the ground, and the pilot already had the one household on the island that could speak for him, keeping his secret. The Hawaiians found out anyway. That evening, somebody switched on a radio that ran off batteries, and word of the attack came in over the water and filled the houses. The temperature in the room changed. The Hawaiians went back to the prisoner, and this time Harada translated straight, because there was nothing left to keep back. The owner of the place, Aylmer Robinson, a Harvard man who spoke fluent Hawaiian, crossed from Kauai on the same trip every week, and he was due in the morning. The islanders settled on a plan. Hand the pilot to Robinson, and let him carry the problem back to someone in a uniform. He did not come in the morning, or the day after. The military had stopped all boat traffic between the islands within hours of the attack, and nobody had told Niihau, because Niihau had no way to be told. So the pilot stayed where he was, billeted at the Haradas under 5 guards, which gave the only couple there who could talk to him long, unwatched stretches of his company. 5 days is a long time to talk a man around. By the end of it, the Haradas had stopped guarding the pilot and started working for him. On December 12th, the thing came apart. Shintani turned up at Kaleohano's place with an offer of 200 yen for the documents the pilot wanted back, and got the same no he had given from the first hour. Rather than report the failure, the beekeeper walked off into the brush and stayed gone. He had picked his moment to disappear, because the rest of it was about to start. While Shintani lay low, Harada moved. He and the pilot rushed the lone guard posted outside the house, and Irene set a record spinning on the phonograph to bury the noise. They forced the guard into a warehouse and took what was stored inside it, the Nambu pistol. Kaleohano had stripped off the plane that first afternoon and a shotgun. With those in hand, they went after everything they still needed. The documents had to be recovered before anyone official saw them. The radio in the wrecked Zero might still reach the fleet. And the man who had told them no twice was out somewhere in the dark with the papers in his pocket. Kaleohano was in his outhouse when he saw them coming. He waited until they turned toward the plane, then bolted out the door and ran, with the two men firing after him, and got to the village ahead of the news to tell everyone to scatter. They did not believe him at first. A grown man sprinting out of an outhouse yelling about a Japanese pilot with a shotgun is a lot to take at face value. They believed him when the guard who had been locked in the warehouse got loose and came running with the same story. By then it was the small hours of the 13th, and the village emptied into caves and thickets and the far beaches. Robinson had already worked out that something was wrong on Niihau, because the islanders were flashing lanterns across the channel at night, the signal they used when they wanted him. At the crash site, the pilot climbed into the dead Zero and worked the radio, trying to raise the fleet, and raised nothing. So he and Harada pulled a machine gun and a belt of ammunition off the wreck, set the plane alight, and put Kaleohano's house to the torch to burn the documents they were sure were inside. The documents were not inside. Kaleohano had them. He had taken the papers when he ran, and he was already most of a day's row out, pulling for Kauai with 5 other men. Most people won't look this up on their own. That's what this channel is for. Subscribe if you want to keep going. Before dawn on the 13th, the pilot and Harada had taken another islander, a man named Kalima, and turned him loose to go find the rower with the papers. Kalima had no intention of finding anybody for them. He went to a friend instead, a big, level-headed ranch hand named Benehakaka Kanahele, and the two of them set out to slip back and steal the machine gun and the ammunition while the pilot's attention was elsewhere. It went wrong from the start. The pair ran into Ben and his wife, Ella, near the wreck and took them both. Now the pilot had 2 more hostages, and a single demand he kept repeating, "Bring me Kaleohano." Ben knew the rower was long gone, out on the water with the others, but he made a show of looking. He did not want to leave Ella with them, so he circled back to her, which was the worst move he could have made in front of a man who was watching for that kind of thing. The pilot read the search for what it was, then made the threat plain through the only man who could carry it. Kill Ben, and everyone left in the village, unless the man with the papers turned up. What the pilot had failed to take in was the size of the man across from him. Ben told Harada to take the guns off the pilot before somebody got killed. He would not touch the pistol, but he did reach for the shotgun. In the half-second it took to pass the weapon over, Ben went for the pilot. Nishikaichi was quicker. He dropped, dug the Nambu out of his flight boot, and put 3 rounds into Ben at close range. Accounts disagree on where the bullets landed. One has it the chest, the hip and the groin, another the stomach, the groin and the thigh. They agree on the rest. Ben, with 3 slugs in him, lifted the pilot off the ground by the neck and one leg and threw him into a lava rock wall hard enough to put him out. Ella was on him with a rock before he could move and brought it down on his skull. Ben finished it with a hunting knife across the throat. Yoshio picked up the shotgun, turned it on himself and was dead inside 2 hours. Ben Kanahele came through all of it alive. Asked afterward where a man shot 3 times finds the strength to throw another man into a wall, he gave the line that ran in the papers. Then I got mad. Help reached Niihau on December 14th. Robinson came across from Kauai with a handful of soldiers and a landing that left them a 6-hour walk to the village, and the rowers who had reached him came too. By the time the party arrived, the fight was over and the body was in the ground. The soldiers went over the burned-out Zero, and Irene Harada and Shintani were taken into custody. Ben healed up at Waimea Hospital on Kauai, and in 1945 the Army gave him the Medal for Merit and the Purple Heart. His wife, who had caved in the pilot's skull with a stone while her husband stood there leaking blood from 3 bullet wounds, got nothing. Nobody ever explained the difference. The story got loose and grew as it travelled. Reader's Digest ran a version in 1942 that recast the islanders as the descendants of ancient warriors, and a songwriter named R. Alex Anderson set the whole business to music, a tune called They Couldn't Take Niihau, No How. played in Honolulu the afternoon Kanahele pinned on his medal. There was a colder current running under all of it. The 3 people on Niihau who had thrown in with the pilot were of Japanese descent, 2 of them American-born, and that did not pass without notice. In a report dated January 1942, a Navy lieutenant named Baldwin set the episode down in writing and drew a conclusion from it, that 2 residents who had shown no sign of disloyalty had still gone over the moment Tokyo seemed to be winning, and that others might do the same. Historians have argued ever since over how much weight that single document carried in the decision to lock up more than 100,000 people of that ancestry on the mainland. The argument did not end in 1945, when the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum later built a display around the salvaged Zero. A group of Japanese Americans pressed it to cut any mention of the Haradas and the Robinsons, who had donated the wreckage, objected to the censoring of it. On the mainland, the camps filled. In the islands, where those same families made up better than 1/3 of the population and most of the skilled trades, the mass roundup never came, for the plain reason that there were too few people left to run the place without them. In Nishikaichi's hometown of Hashihama, in Ehime, a stone had gone up in his honor before any of this was known. It was cut on the understanding that he had died in the attack itself on December 7th, a soldier's death in battle, his plane and his body destroyed as one. His own people did not learn how he died until 1956. The Nambu he pulled from his boot was never recovered, and neither was one of the 2 machine guns off the Zero. The shotgun turned up about 5 years on, when a flood washed it into a wall and somebody on the island found it there.